Okay, so evaluating Triggs functions using the unit circle. I'm going to teach you a couple of different things about this. You may ask, do I really have to memorize this? It is best if you memorize it because you will be using it again in pre-calculus. So if you learn it now, then hopefully you won't have to, you'll know it when we go over it again in pre-calc. The reason why it is called the unit circle is because it has a radius of 1. Okay, a single unit, the radius is 1. It's called the unit circle. The points, okay, each of these, there are 16 points around the circle. They are the x-coordinate is the cosine of the angle. The y-coordinate is the sine of the angle. So the cosine is the x, the sine of the angle is the y. So we're going to start by labeling the points on the x and y axes. Okay, we're going to label the points that are on the x and y axes. We're going to start on the positive x-axis because that is 0 degrees. That's where we start. 0 degrees, 0 radians. We always start on the positive x-axis. That point out there, if this circle has a radius of 1, then that point out there has an x-coordinate of 1 and a y-coordinate of 0. Okay, it has an x-coordinate of 1 and a y-coordinate of 0. So what that means is that the cosine of 0 is 1. If you don't believe me, you can type it into your calculator. If we use degrees, you can use either degrees or radians. Just make sure you're in the right mode. The cosine of 0, when you type that in, is 1. The sine of 0 is 0. Okay, so what the unit circle is in place is to help you remember the values of these special angles. All right, so let's go to the positive y-axis. That would be 90 degrees. And in radians, 90 degrees is pi over 2. Okay, 90 degrees in radians is pi over 2. This is the point. The x-coordinate is 0. The y-coordinate is 1. So that means the cosine of 90 degrees is 0. The sine of 90 degrees, or the sine of pi over 2, is 1. On the negative x-axis, this point is 180 degrees, or that is also known as pi radians. And that would be the point -1, 0. The cosine of 180 degrees is -1. The sine of pi is 0. Oh, yeah. Yes. All right, the cosine of 180 degrees is -1. The sine of pi is 0. Negative y-axis. Okay, negative y-axis. This is 270 degrees when we measure it from that starting point. When we go from 0 all the way to this point, that's 270 degrees, and it is 3 pi over 2. This is the point 0, -1. The cosine of 270 degrees is 0. The sine of 270 degrees is -1. All right, now the reason I started with these points that are on the axes is because they really don't get caught up in the trig when you're identifying those points. Those are just the points because the radius is 1 and it's where they are. Okay, it's where they are on the circle. The radius is 1, so naturally that point out there on the positive x-axis has an x-coordinate of 1 and a y-coordinate of 0. The point on the positive y-axis doesn't have an x-coordinate. Its x-coordinate is 0. Its y-coordinate is 1. Those are just geometric principles there, okay, your coordinate axis principles. All right, now let's go through and let's label the angles that are in each quadrant. Phones are up right now. All right, let's start with the very first angle. Okay, that very first angle right there is 30 degrees, or in radians, that's pi over 6. 30 degrees, or pi over 6. That point is the point, the square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. Okay, the x-coordinate is the square root of 3 divided by 2, and the y-coordinate is 1/2. So that means the cosine of 30 degrees is the square root of 3 over 2. The sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. Now, I'm not going to label everything in the first quadrant because I want you to see the patterns here. Okay, I want you to see the patterns. So let's go to the same point. Let's go directly across to the second quadrant, to the same point there in the second quadrant. Thank you. Which would be right over here. Okay, it's the same point. It has the same x distance. It has the same y distance. But since we've gone to the left, the x-coordinate is negative. So it's negative square root 3 over 2, positive 1/2. That angle is 150 degrees, or 5 pi over 6 radians. Look at this when it comes to the angle as well. Okay, if this one was 30 degrees, it's 30 degrees from the x-axis right here. Then this one is 30 degrees from the x-axis. So if the x-axis is 180 degrees, it's 30 degrees away from it. So it's 150 degrees. Look at the radians. This one is 1 pi over 6 radians from 0. So this one is 1 pi over 6 radians from 1. So 1 minus 1/6 is 5/6. Okay? All right. Let's go to the same point. Let's go down to the same point that's in the third quadrant. Right here, it's the same horizontal distance. It's the same vertical distance. It's just both of those distances are negative. Negative square root 3 over 2, negative 1/2. We are now 30 degrees past 180 degrees, so we're at 210. And we are 1 pi over 6 past 1, so that is 7 pi over 6. Okay, let's go to the same point in the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, x's are positive and y values are negative. So that is positive square root 3 over 2, negative 1/2. We're 30 degrees short of going all the way around the circle. So all the way around the circle is 360. So we're at 330. And all the way, let me label that up here as well. Okay, 0 degrees and 360 degrees are the same angle. It's where you start and where you end. It's the same place, which is also 2 pi when we're talking about radians. So now we're 1/6 short of 2. 1/6 short of 2 is 11 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6. Okay, so I'm trying to build this as best I can so that it makes sense, so it's not an overwhelming amount of information that you feel like you need to memorize. Really, if you learn the first quadrant, all the other quadrants are just related to that first quadrant. Okay, let's go to the middle point. Okay, it's right there in the middle of that quadrant. So what do y'all think the degree measure is? If it's right in the middle of the quadrant, 45 degrees. Okay, it is 45 degrees. Okay, it is 45 degrees. Anybody know what that would be in radians? Pi over 4. Lovely, lovely. All right, so this point is the square root of 2 over 2 and the square root of 2 over 2. This one's really easy to remember because if you're right in the middle of the quadrant, your x and your y are going to be equal to each other. Okay, your x and your y are going to be equal to each other. Now, let me show you something really quick. You have your calculator at your disposal. There is nothing that says if they ask you what's the cosine of 45 degrees that you can't type it into your calculator. But look at what your calculator gives you. Guess what? The answers aren't going to look like that. The answers are going to be in square root form. So, I mean, if you can type that in and the answers are in square root form, all you have to do is type them in and compare the decimals, okay? But if you don't have to spend time typing that into your calculator, you just know the unit circle, so you know the answer, okay? But I want to show you what the calculator tells you versus what the unit circle tells you. They tell you the same thing, they're just in different forms. Decimal form versus exact, okay? We would call the square root form there the exact form, okay? So let's label it in the second quadrant here. In the second quadrant, x's are negative, so that's negative square root 2 over 2, positive square root 2 over 2. The y values are still positive. We are 45 degrees short of 180, so we are at 135. We are 1/4 short of 1, so we are at 3 pi over 4. Okay, in the third quadrant, both coordinates are negative, so it's negative square root 2 over 2, negative square root 2 over 2. Okay, and some of you are probably thinking, well, don't those 2's cancel? Okay, they don't, because the dividing by is not under the square root. Okay, it's the square root of 2 divided by 2, not the square root of 2 divided by 2. All right, here we're 45 degrees past, so that's 225 degrees. And we are 1/4 past 1, so we are at, bless you, 5 pi over 4. Bless you. And in the fourth quadrant, we've got positive x, positive square root 2 over 2, negative y, negative square root 2 over 2. We are 45 degrees short of 360, so we're at 315. And we are 1 pi short of 2 pi, 1/4 pi short of 2 pi. So we are at 7 pi over 4. Because 2 pi would be 8 over 4. So 7 over 4 is one less, 1/4 less. All right. What do y'all think that last angle is? Somebody mentioned it for the last one. It's 60 degrees. Okay, that last one is 60 degrees, and that is pi over 3. It's kind of funny that 30 degrees is pi over 6 and 60 degrees is pi over 3, but I just kind of keep them straight in my head that way. They're opposites of what we would expect them to be. Now, here's also the neat thing about 60 degrees and 30 degrees. All it does is it switches those coordinates. So the x is 1/2 and the y is square root 3 over 2. So it's the same coordinates as 30 degrees, they're just switched. Now let me show you something else in the calculator. If I typed in the sine of 60 degrees, that's the value of the square root 3 over 2. It's 0.866. So it is bigger than 1/2. Okay, the square root of 3 over 2 is bigger than 1/2. So when I'm trying to remember the unit circle and I'm trying to remember between 60 and 30 which one's which, I think about this. I think about 30 degrees is a more shallow angle. Okay, 30 degrees is a more shallow angle. So its x coordinate is bigger than its y coordinate. So its x coordinate is the square root of 3 over 2, its y coordinate is 1/2. Or vice versa. 60 degrees is a steeper angle, so its y coordinate is bigger than its x coordinate. Its y coordinate is the square root of 3 over 2, and its x coordinate is 1/2. Does that kind of make sense? If you think of it from kind of a visual perspective there. 30 is more shallow, so it's got more in its x coordinate. 60 is steeper, it has more in its y component. All right, let's fill in the other quadrants here with our 60 degrees then. 60 degrees short of 180 is 120. 1/3 short of 1 would be 2/3, so 2 pi over 3. This is negative 1/2 positive square root 3 over 2. Once again, let me emphasize, I can't see what you're writing on your paper, but the 2 is not under the square root. Okay, the division symbol's under the entire square root there. The 2 is not inside the square root. All right, down here, we are 60 degrees past 180, so we're at 240. And that is 1/3 past 1, so we're at 4/3 pi. 4/3 pi right there. This coordinate, x is negative, so negative 1/2. Y is negative, negative square root 3 over 2. All right, and in the fourth quadrant, we are 60 degrees short of 360, so we're at 300. We're 1/3 short of 2, so 5/3, 5 pi over 3. This would be positive 1/2, negative square root 3 over 2. Okay, so that is what we call the unit circle. Let me re-emphasize. If you know the first quadrant, all the other quadrants just come from that first quadrant. Okay, Tanner, do you have a question?
So what are we using this for?
I'm getting ready to show you.